Well, good afternoon, folks. Good morning. I'm going to go ahead and get started. We've got a smaller group today, so we might switch a few things up as we go, and that's okay. Yeah, thanks for joining. And today we're going to be talking about exploring climate change through extreme weather phenomenon. Through this virtual workshop series, Climate Generation hopes to bring the best practices of climate change education to you and create opportunities for all educators to connect with a professional community of climate change leaders and educators. I'll be sharing the slide deck, links to resources, and the recording to everybody who is registered at the end of the meeting. My name is Seth Spencer, and I'm the Teach Climate Network Coordinator for Climate Generation, which is a climate change education nonprofit based in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I'm coming to you from Apple Valley, Minnesota, which is the traditional and contemporary home of the Dakota and Anishinaabe. Climate Generation does begin every presentation that we do with a land acknowledgement. We take time to acknowledge the native land we are on because one of the effects of genocide and colonization is that it can be easy to forget that we are still occupying land and that Indigenous individuals and communities are still alive and leading change in our world. We also recognize the tremendous resilience and innovative climate solutions that are created by these communities, and we seek to raise up their voices in climate change education. Climate Generation is also incredibly proud of the diversity of our country and know that our vision for an equitable future can only be achieved when people are working together, bridging experiences and expertise from across the globe. If you have a moment, would love for you to drop in the chat your name, where you're joining from today, and maybe what type of work you do in education. It's always helpful for me to get a general context as we move forward. So feel free to throw that in the chat. I'm going to quickly give an overview of why Climate Generation is even giving this background, or give a background on why Climate Change Generation is sharing this workshop series. Our vision is to ignite and sustain the ability of educators, youth, and communities to act on the systems that perpetuate the climate crisis. And we believe we will achieve this through three overarching strategies that you can see here, which is overcoming disinformation, centering anti-racism and systemic equity, and really personalizing and localizing climate change action. Yeah, well, welcome, Melody, Ryan, Ellen. Thanks so much for throwing your information in the chat. That really helps just kind of get a general idea of what people are kind of bringing and questions that you all might have as we move forward. So we're going to take our first Slido poll. So I will throw that link. It doesn't always work as a link, but you might have to copy and paste. Go to slido.com and punch in that number 4242332, and just would love to hear kind of what are you hoping to get out of the workshop. So new ways of teaching climate change and ways to help train the trainer. Resources and curricular pieces include my daily lessons, ideas of how to talk about extreme weather in the classroom. It looks like we still got one or two folks. I'll give you just a second there. How to better engage with youth on climate topics without getting them discouraged. Definitely wonderful. And learning how to incorporate extreme weather and climate change into middle school or science courses. Wonderful. Thanks, everybody. It gives me an idea of kind of what folks are hoping to get out of the experience. So today, over the next 50 minutes or so, I'm hoping to kind of talk about how do changes in climate and weather impact our land and our communities, and exploring a potential phenomenon of extreme weather and how we can incorporate that into our classrooms. And really, so what? How do we use this? I do just want to briefly mention, because I just realized this the other day personally as I was preparing for this, that talking about extreme weather events can potentially be triggering for our students and ourselves. Extreme weather events are probably the part of climate change that is often most relevant or real to us. Many of our community members have experienced and potentially been horribly impacted by them. And so I think it's just important to remember this as we move forward. As I mentioned, I'm from Minnesota. And so I think often in the Midwest, we're like, extreme weather, climate change, it's not directly impacting us. But I think back to things like flash floods, potential extreme weather tornadoes and hailstorms, all of that, and definitely even worse on the coast. So I think it's just important for us to kind of keep that in mind as we are talking about climate change in general, but definitely talking about extreme weather events. Yeah, welcome, Ayana. Thanks for joining us. Okay, we're going to do another quick poll. Should be the same link. I'll drop that in the chat again. Yeah, I've got some folks already putting stuff in there. Weather that causes harm, things like tornadoes, hurricanes, blizzards, weather that hasn't been experienced often in years past with more significant impacting consequences. I'll touch base on that because that's a really interesting thing that our students are having to kind of come to terms with, that once in 100-year storms are no longer once in 100 years. They seem to be happening every decade. Weather anomalies that cause harm, high temps, large amounts of precip, mega droughts. Exactly. Thanks, everybody. So when I'm talking about extreme weather events, I like to give some context of what does this mean and what does this look like just in the last year or two. So I mentioned that in the Midwest, flooding is probably one of the biggest extreme weather events, large precipitation events that cause rivers to flood. We're still dealing with the Minnesota and Mississippi rivers, partially with large precipitation, but also just the amount of snow and cool spring that we've had. But flooding is a big issue throughout the Midwest. And then we think back to just this winter and some of the record-breaking snow that we've had, especially in California and the Rocky Mountain region. So this is Tahoe. And I think it can be hard for us to think about how some of these events are directly tied back to climate change. And I'll be addressing that as we move forward, because not every extreme weather event that we see has a link back to, or scientists have been able to connect back to climate change, but there are definitely some that really stand out. We've also had some of the worst outbreaks of tornadoes ever for March throughout the southeast part of the United States. So Alabama and Mississippi right at the end of March and early May. And of course, Hurricane Ian just this past fall. And this is looking back a couple of years ago in June 2021, having a major heat wave, especially along the West Coast, where places like Seattle, Washington, Portland, Oregon were getting over 100 degrees for multiple weeks. And so I want to kind of start off with, is extreme weather events, are they becoming more common in the last 2 decades, or are we just kind of forgetting the past of severe weather events over the last century? So Climate Central, and if you've not ever used some of their infographics before, are a great resource, shows us that there has been an increase in specifically extreme precipitation events over the last 60 years or so, especially in the Midwest and Northeast. So the data does support that we are seeing these events much more frequently, and we seem to be breaking records every few years, unfortunately. Again, looking back at that summer of 2021, which 2021 is currently the warmest year on record globally. 2022 was third, I believe, and we'll have to see how 2023 does. But you can see all of those places on hottest days ever on record or in the top 10. I also think it's important to kind of look back, and I apologize how washed out this image was when I was looking at it before. It wasn't too bad, but of how extreme weather impacts not just maybe people on the day of the event, but the economic impact. And so NOAA keeps track of the economic impact of severe weather and puts it into kind of their $1 billion weather and climate disaster infographics. So I always like to do a little trivia on this. Does anybody know what year had the most ever $1 billion weather disasters? So what year has had the most? You'll see here 2022 had 18. Anybody have a guess of what year had the worst number of $1 billion weather disasters? You can throw it in the chat, unmute yourself. Alan believes it was 2019. 2019. Wait, just a second. See any other guesses? 2021. All right, Sean gets a little credit that 2021 was the second. 2021 had $20 billion weather disasters, and actually 2020, so just 2 years ago, 3 years ago, had $22 billion weather disasters. And my next trivia question is, anybody have a guess of which state has had the most $1 billion weather disasters ever? Which state has had the most $1 billion weather disasters ever? And I say ever as in the last 50 years since NOAA has been recording this information. Sean guesses Texas. Ayana guesses Texas. Ryan says North Carolina. Florida. Okay, usually there are not multiple correct guesses. It is Texas. And it is because Texas gets the severe weather of the tornadoes, they get hurricanes, and they get extreme winter weather as well. And so all of these kind of come together with large urban populations to have multiple $1 billion weather disasters every year, unfortunately. Alaska has had 0, mostly because when severe weather happens, it doesn't impact as many people. Hawaii's had 1, I believe. So looking at 2023, we have had 8 or 7 so far. And we'll have to kind of see how the hurricane season goes. But I just addressed this because when I think there were a couple of people that talked about relevance. How do we make this relevant or have students care? And I think students care when it impacts their lives, and they might not be like, okay, there was a $1 billion weather disaster, it's going to impact my life, but they'll definitely hear family members talk about the impact that hail or tornado or drought has had on infrastructure or crops or house damage. And so I think it's just important for us to kind of be aware of those connections beyond just the science that climate change is making many of these events worse or more intense or happen more often. Okay, so the link between extreme weather and climate change is complex. Extreme weather has always happened, of course, before human-caused climate change began. So I think it's important to talk about what's the big deal. Where's the evidence? So climate scientists, of course, continue to update models and predictions that extreme weather events such as hurricanes, heat domes, coastal flooding, and heavy precipitation events will increase in intensity, especially in North America. And that's kind of the one really interesting thing is not every region in the world is impacted possibly in the same way by climate change and extreme weather events, but already North America has a lot of extreme weather events. We have tornadoes and blizzards and hurricanes and droughts. but those impacts, along with coastal flooding, are going to make extreme weather events, as I mentioned, more frequent and more intense as we move forward. So as you can see, the evidence between severe thunderstorms and tornadoes is still pretty weak. Climate scientists haven't really seen a huge connection. However, the weather of very warm and very humid days that cause those tornadoes definitely are increased over the last couple decades, but even in the last 10 years. So we're going to watch a short video before we jump into talking about one of our case studies. Yeah, it's a great question, Ryan. You saw that infographic was from 2012. The research that I've seen is that there still isn't, I guess, a causation between climate change and tornadoes or hurricanes in what's, I guess, causing them. But the research that I've seen is that the intensity of hurricanes can be tied back to climate change, specifically, as I mentioned, that really warm days and the amount of humidity in the atmosphere. I saw recently that on some of the most severe hurricane seasons, partly the Gulf of Mexico is so warm. And so as we get continued incredibly hot summers, we're going to get more frequent hurricanes, but also how quickly they're going from maybe a category 1 or 2 to a category 4. A lot of climate scientists are saying that's kind of unprecedented, and that at least it has to be tied back somewhat to just how warm that both the atmosphere and the water is, and then again, how much humidity is out there. Anyways.
Canal Park is currently flooding right now, so I'm gonna go get some footage before they probably close this down.
Okay, so I shared that video with you partly because it is from Duluth, Minnesota, which is where I grew up, and that is Lake Superior, but also because this is one of the case studies that I've used to talk about extreme weather, but also how to talk about it in the classroom, whether it be for science or chemistry, or even in the history classroom. So how does extreme weather really impact our communities, our people, but also buildings and all of that. And so what we're going to be doing here, probably for the next 10 to 15 minutes, we'll probably do 2 breakout rooms, and definitely let me know if that's not working, because I don't know how many folks can participate in each one. But we're going to look at a case study about extreme weather events on Lake Superior, such as that coastal flooding. And so Lake Superior gets seasonal storms every winter, called nor'easters. So it's common, but what's new-ish is how often they're happening. And also with more extreme weather or precipitation, the lake level has increased. It goes up and down every few years, but it has increased to a level that when there are nor'easters, it's having severe erosion issues, flooding issues. And so what we're going to do is we're going to really look at indicators to explain and prove that climate change is increasing these events, and how do we support our students in kind of action towards finding climate change mitigations or adaptations to extreme weather. So I'm going to be putting a couple things into the chat before I send you to breakout rooms, one of which is this slide deck. I'm going to just double check my share settings. And so you should all have access to the slide deck, and where we are right now is slides 19 and 20. And then I'm going to be sharing a news article that hopefully there will be no firewall, kind of about these storms and the impact they've had on the local community. And what you are going to be doing is looking at the questions on slide 21. So you're going to read the case study, kind of introduce yourselves and talk about what factors are increasing these extreme weather events. What are the environmental and social and economic impacts of extreme weather events? And then how do I incorporate this into my classroom? Because that's really hopefully what you're getting out of this experience is, how do I take these extreme weather events that are happening, we see on the news, and actually incorporate it back into the classroom. And so on slide 22, you'll see some space to kind of throw some ideas in as you go. So what I'm going to be doing in here in just a minute is sending folks into 2 breakout rooms. Definitely come on back if it's not working, or if it's easier to have everybody together. But you're going to be reading that article, using the slide deck, and I'll probably call you back at probably 40 minutes after the hour. I'll see if folks are putting stuff in there. I might give you a few more minutes, but we'll come back at 40 minutes after the hour. And yeah, let me know if you have any questions. Well, welcome on back, everybody. Thanks for taking the time to chat with each other about how to actually use an extreme weather phenomena event such as coastal flooding and really talk about it in the classroom. So we had smaller groups, but at least one group shared out that in Chicago, students are dealing with seeing some of this coastal flooding and definitely having an impact on their communities. And I think one of the challenges about talking about extreme weather phenomena, even though students, it's in their lives, they're seeing it, is then connecting it back to climate change. Because some of those links beyond just a climate scientist says so, can be difficult to really see where that link is. And so sometimes we have to do a little bit of a dive back into the science, but I think there's also an opportunity to ask students or challenge students to talk about it with their families, with their community members. Where are they seeing extreme weather events, and are they more frequent than maybe their family members experienced a decade ago, or looking back even 50 years ago? And it's not going to be every extreme weather event, but we can definitely see those links back again to extreme precipitation and hurricanes and droughts, all of that. So with the last little bit of time that we have, I do want to just share some of those resources. As I mentioned, all of these resource links, I'll send them in the follow-up email, but they're also in the Google Slides that you'll have access to under the notes section of each individual slide. Excuse me. And these are all just great resources for curriculum and lessons about climate change in general, but specifically about extreme weather events. And then we always recommend, if you are not already in the Teach Climate Network, we send out monthly newsletters that have tips and resources and events to support educators in professional development around climate change. monthly virtual workshops such as these, though this will be the last one for the 2022-23 school year. We'll start them up again in September. And then also just being aware of events such as the Summer Institute for Climate Change Education, which is a 3-day professional development opportunity held this July for educators across North America. And there are still scholarships available for educators to participate, so would love for you all to join us. And then, of course, we have Climate Generation has resources such as the Becoming a Climate Change Educator kind of curriculum and really supporting educators that might be just getting their climate change journey started. And then do want to leave you with kind of a reflection. What is an activity or idea that we've talked about today that you could possibly share with your learners? And with that, I'll go ahead and wrap up. I will leave some time for Q&A, but this is where I'm going to end the recording. And please reach out if you have any questions, and hope you can join us for future workshops.